Greetings all! Today we're going to be covering the first half of Season 2 of my RWBY rewrite, aka Volume 4. Again, episodes can be anywhere from 22 minutes to over a half hour, depending on what the episode in question needs. Specifically, I want to talk about the structure of this volume. Since it's meant to focus on each member of Team RWBY fighting the grief and devastation left in the wake of Volume 3's events, episodes don't jump from perspective to perspective. Instead, Team Ranger's story has 3 episodes to itself, and Weiss, Blake, and Yang each have 2 episodes all to themselves each to tell their own stories. However, the first episode continues from the dark tone Volume 3 left off on, focused specifically on the villains, their personalities, and hinting at their motivations. I wanted to include a hint at Oscar's role later in the series, but I feel it's best to leave his storyline and proper introduction for Volume 5. Anyways, let's jump right into Volume 4. The episode begins on black, similar to the same effect used in the original beginning of the end. Pierre asks, "Do you believe in destiny?" and Cinder responds, yes. The first thing we then see is Pierre's murder, because I'm cruel. This time with angles suggesting it's from Cinder's perspective. Her battle with RWBY resumes, and all goes to white when RWBY's silver eye powers go out of control. Once the white fades, Cinder is left crippled on the rooftop. She holds her left eye, screaming in pain, while her left arm has dissolved. Of course, it's now her grim arm, but not once do we ever actually see it. Anytime the camera focuses on Cinder, we strategically hide her grim arm, because we want to save that for the end of Volume 5. RWBY's unconscious, and right as Cinder is ready to go tear her to shreds, Uncle Crow arrives on the scene. Cinder leaps from Beacon Tower using her grim arm to scale herself down, leaving Crow to focus on taking care of RWBY, still in shock of what he's just seen. Emerald and Mercury come across Cinder in horror at the sight. Wrapping Cinder in a cloak, they find shelter in their old dorm room, since the Grim kowtow in Cinder's presence, and even seem to care for her. A seer enters the room, and Salem's voice comes through telling the children not to fret. She tells them to stay put as she sends someone for them. Emerald goes looking for food for them all in the ruins of the kitchen by the dining hall, during which the Grimm attack her for her fear. It's not until she returns to Cinder that they back off, and Cinder devours all of the food. A few days pass till Watts arrives, ignoring Emerald and Mercury and acting antagonistic towards Cinder. On Watts' airship, Watts has programmed it to automatically fly them to Nephastus, the forbidden continent filled with Grimm, telling Emerald and Mercury not to disturb anything. Emerald and Mercury are totally silent, unsure of what to say or think. Mercury breaks the silence, asking Emerald what he thinks of all this. Emerald isn't sure, but she wants to stay loyal to Cinder, especially given all she's been through now. Mercury isn't too sure, but it's then he spots something odd. Not sure on specifically what yet, but it's then revealed to be Neo, here to take down Cinder and her faction, blaming them for Roman's horrific fate. Emerald and Mercury struggle against her, especially given that Emerald's hallucinations don't really match up to the Queen of Illusions. Cinder, stumbling out of Watts' surgery, uses her maiden powers to put Neo in her place and strike terror into her. And Watts is amused at the sight, noting that Salem will be quite happy to have another hand on deck. Unless I'm Sarah Palin. Unless Neo would like to go flying without her parasol. They arrive in Salem's domain, with Emerald and Mercury horrified by the sky turning a deep violet, and the earth black with dark crystals jutting out everywhere. Pools of ichor spawn fledgling Grimm, and Watts tells Emerald, Mercury, and Neo to watch themselves, as without Salem's protection, they are very much at risk of being torn to shreds. And even though Cinder is fine, Watts makes a note on how her bad attitude makes him want to purposefully crash the airship. Inside, whenever we see Salem, the camera remains off of her face, and most of her scenes use very uncomfortable camera angles to keep Salem from becoming, well, boring and unthreatening. Watts goes to resume his checkups on Cinder with Salem's oversight, while Emerald, Mercury, and Neo are told not to move. Tyrion pops right the fuck out of nowhere and is super crazy. There's much more emphasis on his fanatical devotion to Salem as a godly figure. In fact, the Faunus' primary religion, whose oldest variant says that the god that created their kind abandoned them, shares some commonalities with Tyrion's view. To Tyrion, Salem is their goddess returned, promising to deliver them a new world. In short, he terrifies the fuck out of Emerald, Mercury, and Neo. He does ask Hazel to greet the guests, though when Hazel ignores, Tyrion scurries away to play with the Beowulfs. Remember this for later. Emerald, Mercury, and Neo are terrified by the large and silent Hazel. Emerald opts to try and make some kind of connection with him, since he seems like the one normal guy, only for Hazel to dismiss her and leave her with an ominous warning that they'll need to toughen up to get the job done. Hazel also tells them to be wary of Cinder, while also telling them not to make any mention of what he's just said to her. Salem summons Emerald, Mercury, and Neo via a seer, and they go out to where Salem had her little monologue at the end of Volume 3, overlooking the field of Ichor from which fledgling Grimm spawn. During this, we sometimes hear Tyrion's screams, yells, and laughter, which Salem enjoys as if he was her toddler playing with his toys. One by one, she asks them each about their pasts and why they agreed to join Cinder. Emerald mentions how she never even knew her parents and had to survive by stealing and running between Vale and Vacuo to avoid the authorities. Mercury, meanwhile, was the son of an abusive, alcoholic assassin in the Phantasm Mountains, and whenever Grimm would target Mercury for his negative emotions, his father would blame him, drawing in even more Grimm and being too cold and dense to care what he was doing. Neo doesn't even need to speak for Salem to sense death encroaching upon her. Salem senses the anger, despair, and grief within her, which could make her the perfect target for the Grimm. With all of them still terrified but trying to compose themselves, Salem tells them that the world of humans can be just as bad as the Grimm, only hiding their cruelty and callousness behind lies, propaganda, and arrogance. She swears that when their mission is complete, the world will be a better place. No suffering, no huntsman, no Grimm. She then dismisses them, telling them to await her in the council room. Afterwards, we get the villain council scene from the original The Next Step, with Emerald, Mercury, and Neo standing silently beside Cinder, across from Hazel and Watts. Tyrion is not here yet. Watts continues to antagonize Cinder, pissing off Emerald. Hazel tells Watts to back off, and when Salem enters the room, she concurs with Hazel, asking Watts why he must be so cruel. Watts responds that he's not very fond of failure, and Salem recounts Cinder's accomplishments, becoming the Fall Maiden, destroying Vale's CCT tower, rendering Beacon inaccessible, and killing Ozpin, asking Watts which of those are a failure. Watts simply says that she didn't get the relic at Beacon, and also notes that the girl with the silver eyes. Salem says that now they have all the time in the world to get the relic of choice when Cinder is able, though she is concerned at RWBY's silver-eyed warrior powers. Tyrion arrives covered in ichor, Grimm blood, and apologizing to Salem for his lateness, for which Salem forgives him. Salem then reveals that the maiden powers aren't what made Cinder susceptible to the silver eyes, but rather how she obtained those powers. Namely, the Scarab Grimm. Cinder is to remain in Salem's domain as she continues her recovery and training, supervised by Salem herself, as well as Emerald and Mercury. Watts, meanwhile, is sent to Mistral to meet with their informant, dropping Neo off with their allies in the area. Hazel is to go to Menagerie to meet with Sienna Khan, since Adam managed to arrange the meeting. He's to make sure Sienna Khan joins their side, so they'll have the White Fang at their disposal. Tyrion is at first told to resume his hunt for the Spring Maiden, though when Cinder mentions RWBY, Salem opts to have Tyrion prioritize finding RWBY and bringing her to Salem alive. She reassures them all that with their united efforts, Haven will fall next, and Tyrion cackles like a maniac. We then cut to a nightmare during which we get hints at Cinder's past. Her stepmother and stepsisters are cruel to her, and a young Cinder assumes her present form before her injuries to kill them all. Their house goes aflame, and Cinder approaches Amber to take her powers, only to scream in pain as she feels Amber's pain. She then assumes Pyrrha's role in her death, and as RWBY screams for Pyrrha, Cinder jolts awake, wanting nothing more than to kill RWBY. We end the episode on Team Ranger in Ophrys, Jon's home city, where his family sees them off for their trip to Haven Academy. Word is that Atlas has sealed off Mistral's ports, and with all airships in Vale grounded by the Council, this is Ranger's best bet. They head off, and we get the intro, Let's Just Live. The episode ends on RWBY's nightmare going back to the fall of Beacon. It starts as a dream mimicking the legendary Volume 2 food fight, but when RWBY holds Weiss, she's covered in blood and legit comatose. Yang's lost her arm, and Team Juniper is missing. RWBY runs after Blake out the door, only to find Beacon burning down and filled with Grimm. In the distance, the silhouettes of Cinder, Emerald, and Mercury approach, with Cinder holding Pyrrha's severed head. RWBY wakes up as she, Ren, Nora, and Jean are taking a ship to Mistral, specifically right here to a port town called Suiren. They'd wanted to go to Mistral, but the Vale Council banned all airships leaving and entering the country, while the Elysian military has apparently sealed off all of Mistral's ports. And so Jean's family gave them just enough Liane for their journey to Mistral. Their plan is to take a train from Suiren to Shion, and then an airship across Lake Matsu through a military checkpoint to reach Mistral. But we all know this will go very wrong. Also, quick reminder, the Team Ranger already knows about Shady Oz and the Maidens, and they also know that whoever's behind this is someone named Salem. A young girl passes by and is in awe of the kids' get-ups and weapons, especially Pyrrha's shield, crown, and broken spear. Quick explanation. Crow, to respect Pyrrha's death, brought Pyrrha's gear with him, and left them with RWBY before he left. As they left, RWBY opted to give these weapons to Jean. The girl says she wants to be a huntress, though Team Ranger is unsure of what to even say. That's when the girl's parent tells her that she'll never allow it given what's just happened. Once they reach Suiren, RWBY and Jean experience some culture shock. The intro. Team Ranger heads around to get new supplies, including new outfits. Then head to the local blacksmith shop to get Jean's armor fused with Pyrrha's. The smith recognizes Pyrrha's armor, then Jean, Ren, and Nora as her teammates. When he asks what happened to her, a brick is thrown through the shop window, and they find anti-Faunus rhetoric written on the storefront. Jean and Ruby chase down the vandals, despite Ren and Nora's vocal protests. They catch the vandal, only for the local police to chastise Ruby and Jean for taking the law into their own hands, especially making some nasty comments about the Faunus blacksmith. Ren and Nora note that Mistral isn't as kind to the Faunus' Veil, though the blacksmith thanks Team Ranger for their kindness and gives Jean his new armor free of charge. He does make a note that the girl who wore this armor was an amazing young woman, despite what people have recently been saying, and this further messes with Jean's head. They take the train to Shion only for a Geist to possess some of the passengers' luggage and run rampant. Team Ranger chases it off only for it to possess some nearby boulders, taking the form of a Petrigigus, and smashing the tracks and sending the train flying far below into the Zilia forest. Team Ranger battles the Grimm and slays it, though their group dynamic is off since they've just begun their journey. RWBY wants to help the other passengers, but the team resolves that they don't have the time nor resources to stop, and decide to head on, all feeling like shit. They camp out that night, planning to reach Shion by the next morning. RWBY has another nightmare, this time about witnessing the death of Roman and the perceived death of Neo. She awakens and goes for a walk, noticing smoke pouring out in the distance. A la the Volume 4 character short, RWBY battles the Grimm, wrecking Shion, including a Berengal. Once the fight ends, RWBY spots Raven wearing her mask and watching her from afar. The rest of Team Ranger calls RWBY, and as she's distracted, Raven vanishes. Once the others arrive and the village is free of Grimm, they find most of the villagers are dead. A dying huntsman says that a tribe of nasty bandits attacked, giving way to the Grimm swarm. One nasty Grimm in particular attacked, and he describes it as a horse and his rider before slipping away. Ren and Nora have an idea of what this could be, but Ren refuses to speak. With the airships destroyed, the group is now forced to take the long way around Lake Matsu on foot to Mistral through the Golden Mountains. They camp out again, though RWBY is unable to sleep. Hearing Jean yelling, RWBY goes thinking he might need help, only to find Jean training to a video he and Pyrrha took back at Beacon. Jean insisted that they record this so that he could further train once the year ended while Pyrrha was busy back in Mistral. RWBY heads back to the campsite, and Nora asks if RWBY wants to talk. They chill out and talk about everything that's happened, and Nora and RWBY talk about how they view themselves as trying to bring light to the people around them that they feel need them the most. Nora knows that she might come across to some people as annoying or crazy, but she does what she does to try and bring smiles to people she feels need a laugh in the face of darkness. RWBY relates to this, and Nora insists that RWBY is not alone through all this. RWBY thanks her, and she goes back to sleep while Nora opts to stay up and enjoy the stars, also hinting that she wants to be the one to look over her friends, specifically Ren. The next day, the team heads on to Higanbana. Nora is excited because she and Ren often worked odd jobs there in their youth, so it's kind of like going home for them, with Ren trying to force a smile. The team decides to spend a week or two there resting and working some odd jobs so they can save up for more supplies and better transport to Mistral. As they walk, however, they're being watched by more Bronwyn tribe bandits, specifically a squadron led by Vernal. Crow confronts them, and we get a brief fight where Vernal supposedly shows off her spring maiden powers before they flee. It's right then Crow's confronted by a red-eyed Raven, which then flies off towards Higanbana. That night, as Team Ranger chills at the inn, Crow gets a drink at the bar. Raven buys him a drink, bottom shelf of course, and they chat upstairs. Raven asks how Yang is, though Crow responds that she damn well knows. Raven goes on about how Crow helped Ozpin send Pyrrha to her death, and now RWBY and her friends are on that same path. Crow calls out Raven for leaving their cause, only for Raven to bite back that he abandoned their tribe. Crow insinuates that Raven has the Spring Maiden, though Raven refuses to give a clear answer and leaves via her portal. RWBY has yet another nightmare, this time with her fears of what Crow told her about the Silver Eyes. Tai, Zwei, Crow, and Yang all turn into Grimm as RWBY rushes to find safety. And during this, her very intense emotions give way to her silver-eyed powers, killing them all. She comes across her mother still alive, only to witness a masked Raven kill her right before her eyes. Right as Raven moves to take off her mask, RWBY awakens in a cold sweat. The others are asleep, and RWBY goes to the bathroom to cry alone, and that is the end of the episode because I'm a monster. Our cold open for Weiss' first episode is right as she and RWBY were fighting Emerald and Mercury by Beacon Tower. Weiss sends RWBY up the side of the tower, though we stay with Weiss as she fights the dynamic dickheads. Emerald's semblance proves an issue only for Winter, who rushed right to Vale when she saw what was wrong, to rock up and provide backup, followed by Crow. Once the light of RWBY's silver eyes goes off, Emerald and Mercury vanish. Winter takes Weiss back to Vale as Crow hopes to himself that RWBY's okay. The camera pans up to the sky as we see a bird, obviously Crow, fly up towards the tower. The intro. At the hospital, Weiss is grateful to see her friends are okay. The facility is overwhelmed by the number of both citizens and students who are injured. Jean asks Weiss where RWBY and Pyrrha are, but Weiss doesn't know. Team Funky is actually pretty happy that Weiss is okay, but right as Weiss sees Blake run out of her and Yang's room and goes after her, Jacques' yell freezes Weiss right in her tracks. Jacques is in a rage, demanding Weiss Weiss return with him to Atlas, threatening to sue Vale and Beacon if she refuses. She relents and goes with him, with everyone wanting to step in but unsure of what to say or do. Winter tries to confront Jacques, only for Jacques to insult her and push her aside. On the plane ride back to Atlas, it's mostly silent until Jacques comments on how foolish it was to let Weiss leave home. He sees his mere Nestor and refuses to let Weiss further her studies as a huntress. He also tells her to fix her ponytail, referring that he wants it perfectly centered rather than off to the side, further cementing her defeat. They reach the manor and get a good view of it. Klein welcomes Weiss home, though Weiss knows she's been returned to her cage. We cut to the present, a couple weeks later, where Weiss has her new outfit and her centered ponytail. She's in her bedroom, and Klein informs her that Jacques wants to speak with her. As she heads to her father's office, we get Whitley being all creepy, feigning hurt that Weiss has seemingly been avoiding him since she arrived home. Whitley, however, seems to be on Weiss' side, which does make Weiss feel a bit better, if a tad suspicious. Ironwood and Jacques are arguing over the dust embargo in his office, and before Ironwood leaves, he tells Weiss that she's always welcome at Atlas Academy. Jacques scoffs at the idea, and trying to appease him, Weiss agrees. This scene is mostly the same, with Jacques low-key forcing Weiss to agree to sing at the charity concert, though Jacques admits that some of those funds will be going to keep the company afloat in light of the recent embargo. Translation: ain't none of that going to Vale. Weiss exits, and Klein is there to make her smile and give her some hot coffee. A couple weeks later, Weiss is practicing her singing in her room, during which we get the lyrics of Mirror Mirror Part 2, namely the parts about her stopping her fall. Whitley barges in, noting how he's annoyed at how all Weiss songs are so depressing and dreary. He low-key encourages her to be more rebellious in her song, and Weiss takes the bait. Klein pops in for a moment to make sure Weiss eats, since her appetite hasn't been all there since she got home. He congratulates Weiss on how well she performed during the tournament, and asks her about her time at Beacon. She talks about her teammates, only to cry upon realizing she probably will never see any of them ever again. The night of the concert, Weiss moves her ponytail to the side before her father can tell her to fix it. She performs This Life Is Mine, though at the art exhibit afterwards, no one seems to mention her choice of lyrics. Jacques is low-key racist as he talks about how Faunus workers in the mantle mines are compensated the same as his human workers, and that Faunus are simply better built to deal with the more dangerous conditions deeper within the mines. Weiss tries to get away, only barely managing to convince Jacques to let her walk freely by saying she's gonna go get a drink. Klein briefly congratulates Weiss on her singing before returning to his duties, and Weiss stares at a portrait at the once glorious Beacon Academy that reads, "To show the world we care." Henry approaches Weiss, and turns out they were actually old friends, since Henry's family is pretty well established in the Elysian aristocracy. And by old friends, I mean that Henry hit on her relentlessly for her money and is a dick. He's the only one to comment on her lyrics, and even then says Weiss has no reason to rebel and is ungrateful. Weiss tells him to leave, and begrudgingly he does. Another woman mentions how Vale deserved the fall of Beacon, specifically for being so kind to the Faunus and not going after the White Fang enough. Weiss calls her and the other rich snobs of Atlas out, and when Jacques tries to stop her, as Whitley is all damn smug, Weiss' anger gives way to an accidental summon of a Borbatusk. Ironwood slays the summon, then says Weiss is the only person there making any sense before leaving. But as the news crews gather, Jacques is pissed. Once they get home, Jacques scolds Weiss for her actions, not only defending the Faunus, but acting out of turn and daring to use her semblance. Weiss asserts that she's wanted to restore the glory of the Schnee family name that her grandfather established, and that Jacques married into the family for the money and ran it into the ground. Jacques slaps Weiss, and Weiss is immediately silenced. Composing himself, Jacques says that he's disappointed in Weiss and names Whitley the heir to the Schnee Dust Company, confining Weiss to the manor grounds. Whitley reveals his true colors as he tried to incite Weiss into rebelling so that Jacques would no longer put up with Weiss. Weiss cries to herself, then remembering a conversation she and Ruby had, whether it's one we actually saw or it's one I'm now going to try to integrate in hindsight, I've no idea, about how in the face of hopelessness, Ruby would always try to find the light and fight for what she believed in. With that, Weiss sneaks into her parents' room, takes back Mir and Nestor, and gets ready to train in secret. The cold open here is Blake waking up in her hospital bed. She's dressed in a hospital gown with her cat ears exposed. The nurse is kind and tells Blake her belongings are right over in the corner and that she's all pouched up. Once the nurse leaves, Blake goes over to the still unconscious Yang, crying to herself and apologizing. She writes her the note and then leaves, blaming herself for all that's happened as she hears Weiss yelling for her. The intro. Blake has gotten herself a new outfit and is wandering Vale. She recalls what Adam told her, then hops aboard a ship heading for a menagerie. That night, she grabs dinner from the ship's kitchen and returns to her single single room, noticing some odd figures following her along the way. Blake has a nightmare involving the deaths of Tuxin and the White Fang lieutenant, with Adam saying that Blake has become just like him. She goes to strike him only to realize she's cut off Yang's arm and killed all her friends. She awakens in a cold sweat, then heads out for a walk to find it's now sunset. Resolving that she won't need her bow, she simply tosses it into the sea. The ship captain notices Blake's anxiety and approaches, complimenting her cat ears. He's trying to calm her down so she won't attract any Grimm, but opts to just leave Blake alone. I figured the captain could have a similar sense of humor to Yang, because I just fucking love to torture every character I write. The cloaked figures discuss it together about Blake, and Blake confronts them. That's right when the sea dragon Grimm reveals itself and attacks. Sun ditches the cloak, as does Velvet, realizing their cover's been blown. Blake is shocked, of course, but the fight ensues anyway, ideally with less. After the fight, the ship resumes its course to Menagerie, with the ship captain thanking Blake's Sun and Velvet and saying that they'll be in their debt. Blake questions Sun and Velvet for following her, and they revealed that they saw her leaving and decided, along with the rest of their teams, to go after her and to make sure she was alright. For the record, Velvet is here as well, so 1, Sun is not alone, and 2, because Velvet served as Blake's mentor back in Volume 1. Blake reveals she was worried about her parents. Sun is sure that Blake was going to take on the White Fang with backup, and Blake admits he's half right. Velvet and Sun resolve to stick with Blake through this, and Blake relents, knowing they won't leave. Once they reach Kuokuana, it's much more crowded than we see in the original. We get some insight that most of the mainland of Menagerie is desert and rainforest filled with terrifying and lethal creatures, along with some nasty Grimm. Likewise, Menagerie has no CCT tower, meaning its signals are incredibly weak regularly, made even worse after the fall of Beacon, especially since they can't communicate with the other countries. They reach Blake's house, and her parents tear up as they see her, though they still call her Raja. Blake explains everything that happened, and Gira and Kali agree to refer to her as Blake to make her comfortable. However, Sienna Collin is also here. The main White Fang stronghold is located in Menagerie, and Sienna has been talking with Gira on how to handle the aftermath of the fall of Beacon as well as Adam. Sienna assures Blake that they will indeed stop him. It's then Corsica Fennec informs Sienna that they have duties to attend to, along with a visitor, and Sienna leaves. Blake sets herself up in her old bedroom. It's exactly as she left it 5 years prior, and Gira and Kali have kept dusting it for whenever she was ready to come home. We see some cute family photos, including one of baby Blake with her parents, as well as her grandmother Induma, the White Fang's founder. Cue a little flashback to baby Blake 5 years ago, yelling at her parents for giving up the cause for their cushy, comfortable life as she leaves them for Adam and the White Fang. Blake remains in her room for the rest of the day, and Velvet and Sun inquire why Blake hasn't talked to her parents. They encourage her to talk to them, and so she does. It's essentially that same conversation from a much-needed talk, with Blake hating herself for calling her parents cowards, though Kali is included this time. Gira and Kali admit that while they'd given up the fight for equal rights, they admired that Blake was still willing to fight for what she believed in. They do ask about Blake's teammates, and she talks about each of them. She even comments that Weiss isn't what they'd expect, and that good schnees do in fact exist. However, once they get to Yang, Blake decides to call it a night, and her parents respect this. However, Blake notices someone watching them from the trees outside, and she decides to keep this close to her chest. Meanwhile, at the White Fang stronghold, Sienna meets with Adam, calling him out for his behavior and for refusing to respond to her communications for months at a time. Hazel shows up to try and convince Sienna to join them, but then Sienna says that she's been told of their cruel master Salem already, and she's not interested. Adam realizes this means Blake is here, and as he prepares to assassinate Sienna, Sienna reveals her badassery and fights back with her fucking chain, cause she ain't going down without a fight. Hazel sits this out, and Adam and Sienna battle for control over the White Fang. However, Sienna inadvertently charges up Adam's semblance throughout the fight till he's able to break her aura in one go and pierce her abdomen. Adam names himself the White Fang's new Supreme High Leader, telling those witnessing this murder to spread the rumor that Sienna was assassinated by a human huntsman in retaliation for the fall of Beacon. Hazel's pissed, saying that no one had to die today, but Adam begs to disagree because he's fucking Discount Joffrey. The cold open here is Yang awakening from her shock in the hospital. Tai Yang is there, as is Crow with an unconscious RWBY. As they head back to Patch, Yang asks Jean, Ren, and Nora what happened to Pyrrha, and where Blake and Weiss went, and Team Juniper minus P doesn't look too happy to discuss. The intro. We cut to the day right after RWBY left for the journey to Mistral. Tai Yang is stressed and upset, and as Crow tries to calm him down, Tai blames Crow for this. Crow then promises he'll keep an eye on RWBY and protect her, since Tai needs to stay on Patch to lend a hand both in Vale's reparations, as well as at Signal Academy. Yang overhears all of this, and then goes to RWBY's room. She recounts RWBY telling her of this plan, as well as what she knows about the maidens Pyrrha, Salem, and Shady Oz. Though Yang calls this all ridiculous, and tells RWBY to just give up. In the present, Yang cries to herself at how the simpler days are now gone. A couple weeks later, we get Yang watching TV and walking around the house doing chores, looking depressed as fuck. However, the news notes that with the CCT tower down at Beacon, they haven't been able to communicate with the councils of the other countries, and we especially see this with how awful the quality of the newscast is, and when the broadcast keeps cutting in and out. Tai shows the automail arm to Yang, which he mentions was courtesy of General Ironwood. Yang doesn't want to put it on, saying she isn't feeling like it. Later in the kitchen, she drops the glass due to her phantom sensations of her missing right arm, and winds up having a panic attack as she flashes back to Adam attacking her. Another week passes as we get the Port and Oobleck kitchen scene from Family, with little to nothing changing since I love it. However, Glinda is not restoring Beacon because Beacon is still festering with Grimm, and Port and Oobleck mention that Professor Peach is offering counseling to survivors of the fall of Beacon, though Yang says she's fine and doesn't need to talk to anybody about it. Yang tries to sleep again, but has another nightmare, this time mimicking her Volume 5 character short. It quickly devolves as Ruby is terribly hurt, with Raven standing there unwilling to help, simply saying that she warned Yang. She wakes up and goes into the kitchen for a drink, and notices Wai growling at something. Tyrion attacks looking for Ruby. Tai Yang steps in, with Yang freaking out. Tyrion manages to get a hold of Ruby's note, then flees the scene, though he does mention a queen he serves, with Tai Yang muttering Salem's name. Tai hopes that Crow will be able to fully protect Ruby, and wanting to make sure, Yang opts to start therapy with Professor Peach, with this being shown the next morning as Yang walks out of the house with her automail on. Tai takes Yang to Signal Academy where some Beacon students are helping set up for the new school year, as a good portion of the Beacon students are now going to be studying at Signal, given Beacon is, you know. Carden mocks Yang for how weak she looks, with Russell uncomfortable and Sky and Dove forcing themselves to laugh along. Coco, Yatsu, and Fox run up to hug Yang, then apologize when Yang starts panicking over them surrounding her. Yang heads into Professor Peach's office, and he asks what she'd like to talk about. I also want to note that since I based Professor Peach off James and the Giant Peach, his desk actually has a peach along with little figurines based on the Giant Peach characters. Our cold open is Team Ranger using the money from their odd jobs to resupply, as well as to buy some horses for the rest of their trip to Mistral. We see that some of Higanbana's residents are familiar and friendly with Ren and Nora, and remind them to be careful on their journey, as the Hasai forest is filled with Grimm, along with the ruins of Kuruyori and Oniyori, which both make Ren and Nora very anxious for obvious reasons. As Team Ranger heads off, Crow is hungover from the previous night, so he opts to wait till he's sober and sleeps in, only for Tyrion to approach the waitress at the Higanbana Inn about finding someone. The intro. Team Ranger approaches the ruins of Oniyori, though they don't rush in given that Ren already knows this place. Ren gives us the little backstory about how the aristocrats of Mistral, particularly those descended from the old emperors, wanted to establish their own nation outside the Mistral Council's control. It was unfinished, though Ren and Nora are quiet as to why. That's when Tyrion waltzes up, having waited for the perfect opportunity to attack. He chases off the horses, which take off most of Ranger's supplies, and tears their map to shreds. Team Ranger tries to put up a fight, but they can't keep up, and so when Ruby's aura flickers and Tyrion prepares to sting her, this is just to weaken her, and they'll cure her once he brings her back to Salem, Jean rushes to cover her. It's then Crow steps in to save the day and be the most badass uncle ever. We get the Crow, Ruby, and Tyrion fight set to bad luck charm, with Crow's aura flickering and Tyrion poisoning him. Ruby manages to sever Tyrion's stinger, and Tyrion mumbles she'll forgive you to himself as he flees. That night, Ranger sets up a campfire of one of Oniyori's buildings, echoing back to the campsite Team RWBY had in Mountain Glen. Acts all the info we already know, and just skip to the kids calling out Crow for not telling them the whole truth and watching them from afar. When Jean says Crow wanted to use Ruby's bait, Crow bites back immediately and reveals his bad luck semblance. They demand to know more about Salem, and Crow tells them the tale of the gods of light and darkness and how they created humanity. Crow then reveals that the god of darkness had one creation named Salem who particularly despised humanity, reawakening the Grimm to wipe them off the face of the planet. Ozpin has been reincarnating through the ages to battle Salem endlessly, particularly as the Kings of Vale, which further upsets Jean since his family fought for Ozpin in the Great War. Moreover, Salem is after the relics of the old gods within each of the Huntsman Academies, which are kept in a vault that can only be opened by their respective maiden. Fall for choice at Beacon, spring for knowledge at Haven, winter for creation at Atlas, and summer for destruction at Shade. With that, the group resolves to continue their journey to Haven to check in with Lionheart and ensure the Relic of Knowledge is protected. However, the Spring Maiden vanished many years ago and hasn't been seen since. RWBY asks Crow if there's anything else he'd like to share, and when he says no, she asks about her silver eyes and whether her parents were involved in this, and moreover, whether her mother died in Ozpin's war. Crow opts not to answer and heads to sleep, noticing Raven in bird form watching. RWBY has yet another nightmare, this time involving her friends, and her mother on a chessboard. Ozpin is controlling their pieces, and the other side is filled with Grimm, along with Cinder, Emerald, Mercury, and Tyrion. The figure representing Salem is amorphous since RWBY isn't sure what she looks like, but that just means it's up to the horrors of the imagination. Horror ensues, and right as RWBY is used by Ozpin to claim victory with her silver eye powers, she awakens. She rushes to Crow and finds that Tyrion's venom has taken hold. Crow simply wakes up, says that's unfortunate, then passes out. Wonderful. Our episode begins on the Volume 5 Weiss character short, emphasizing that this episode is going to serve as Weiss finally breaking free from her father. We cut to the present with Weiss opening her window, enjoying the morning, and ready to break free. Right before the intro, she grabs her sword and prepares herself for her training. The intro! Weiss practices her form, but before she can practice summoning, she rushes to hide her sword as she hears someone approach. Klein reassures her that she will always have an ally in him, no matter what Jacques may threaten him with. He came to inform Weiss that Jacques requested her presence for a family breakfast. In the dining room, Weiss finds her father and brother waiting at the table. Jacques informs Weiss that since Whitley will now be the company's heir, Weiss' primary role will be to remain in the manor, only returning to the public eye for charity events where he will be able to show her love for her family. Then in a few years, he'll find a suitor for her, so she'll have a nice, cushy life where she can't interfere with company affairs. Weiss feigns agreement, then finishes her breakfast quickly and excuses herself to her room. Weiss moves to train again, but stops as she hears someone approaching again. Whitley says that he and Jacques will be heading into the city to meet with some of their business partners, and asks Weiss if she'd like anything in the most damn condescending way possible. Weiss asks if Whitley is jealous of Weiss' semblance, only for Whitley to say he finds those powers and the concept of huntsman barbaric, and his disdain for General Ironwood. It's then Weiss slams the door in Whitley's face. Weiss resumes her training, but right as she's about to summon the Armageddon, Klein busts in with a huge cart of food. Weiss is confused, only for Flint and Neon to jump out of the cart, with Neon devouring all of the food because she's Neon. Klein knew Weiss would need help in getting out of the manor, and so he reached out to some friends she made during the tournament who thankfully live in Atlas. They all begin to hatch their plan to get Weiss out of Atlas so she can meet up with Winter, who's currently stationed in Mistral. A couple weeks pass, and Weiss sneaks through the manor with Klein, who has to pardon himself when Whitley calls him. I also want to note that because Weiss isn't an idiot, she's taken off her shoes so they don't echo on the marble floors. On her way, she overhears Jacques rambling on a call with his business partners about General Ironwood, and when he moves to leave, Weiss uses her glyphs to lock the door. Weiss resumes, and she winds up running into her mother Willow, who went on a late-night alcohol run. Willow isn't surprised Weiss is leaving, then nods that Weiss can continue in an oddly bittersweet moment. Klein opens up the secret passage in the library, and Weiss hugs it and thanks him. She thanks Klein one last time before she heads out, and the second chorus of Mirror Mirror Part 2 plays as she heads through and reaches the end, greeted by Team Funky. Back in the manor, however, Klein goes to meet with Jacques, who broke down the door. He asks where Weiss is as Whitley gives an evil grin. Weiss and Team Funky sneak into Atlas Academy, where they've arranged a flight to Mistral with a pilot who's also smuggling dust out of the country. As they sneak, we see CL speaking with Penny's father. Once in the hangar, however, Jacques and Whitley reveal themselves, refusing to let Weiss leave. Since the SDC created the military's weapons, Whitley is able to hack into the Knights and Paladin President and set them against Team Funky and Weiss. A fight ensues, though when it doesn't go his way, Jacques takes over a prototype of the Paladin Mark II. Weiss and Team Funky struggle against him, though This Life is Mine plays as Weiss manages to fully summon the Armageddon. It takes down the Paladin, leaving Jacques trembling in fear and slicing off half his shitty mustache. CL arrives on the scene, demanding Jacques and Whitley leave Weiss be, allowing Weiss to leave with no issue at all. Weiss thanks her friends, then hops aboard the ship as it takes off. The cold open is Blake heading out into the garden to greet her parents. These flowers are largely based on Hawaiian flora, and one flower in particular stands out to Blake, the firecracker fern, which reminds her of Yang. It's then coursing a Fennec approach with bad news. The intro! Once the Albanes leave, Blake's family meets, including Saber, their head guard, who actually helped Blake train, so basically it's her version of Klein. Sienna Khan is reported to have been assassinated by a human huntsman in retaliation for the fall of Beacon. None of them believe this at all, and they believe Adam has killed her to seize full control of the White Fang. Blake and Velvet decide to head inside their stronghold to gather information. The steps of the stronghold are filled with the people of Kuokuana protesting Adam becoming the White Fang's leader and shouting that he's killed Sienna. Blake and Velvet make their way inside. Meanwhile, the son asks Blake's parents why they left the White Fang. Gira admits he was tired of the fight, and given Sienna's rise in popularity with her violent tactics, Gira felt it was best that he stepped aside. He's regretted it ever since, especially given it's what led Blake to leave. Blake and Velvet overhear Adam and Hazel speaking to Salem through a seergram. Salem is incredibly furious that Adam killed Sienna without her approval, having the seer briefly strangle him similar to Lionheart. Salem says that they're still searching for the Spring Maiden, though since Headmaster Lionheart of Haven Academy is on their side, it would be best if Adam and Hazel were able to assume control of the other Fang branches, beginning with the Mistral Brotherhood. Salem also mentions the silver-eyed girl, and Blake and Velvet realize she means Ruby. Right as Blake sends this information to her parents on her scroll, Ilya comes across them and demands that they leave before they're spotted. Velvet gets ready to fight, but Blake stops her and begs Ilya to come to her senses. Adam and the other White Fang grunts, however, congratulate Ilya on stalling the intruders as they grab Blake's message. There's a brief fight, and as Blake and Velvet escape, Adam orders they accelerate their plans to assassinate the Purnimas and take over Kuokuana. There's a huge fight at Blake's family's house, during which we get highlights including, but not limited to, Sun versus Trifa, Velvet versus Yuma, Gira versus Hazel, and Blake versus Adam. Saber and the guards allow Blake and her crew to escape, and they run as Saber and his squadron are defeated and captured by Adam's forces. Blake, Gira, Kale, Sun, and Velvet are all forced to the desert mainland of Menagerie, though Blake tries to remain hopeful, remembering some of Ruby's words about making the world better despite its issues, as we get a reprise of Wings. The cold open here is Yang training a la her scene in 2 Steps Forward, 2 Steps Back, with emphasis put on the emotional distance between Yang and Tai. Yang knows she won't get any real answers about Raven and Ozpin from her father, and so she doesn't even bother. The intro. Yang resumes her therapy with Professor Peach at Signal Academy. She talks about how her semblance is apparently nothing more than temper tantrums, and Peach asks if Yang really believes that. Yang isn't sure, and Peach encourages Yang to think what her father told her and come to her own conclusion. Still, Yang's very hesitant to say anything more on how she is emotionally. Afterwards, she resumes her physical therapy with Coco, Fox, and Yatsuhashi as her overseers. Coco tries to talk about Blake, but Yang isn't hearing any of it. She hears Cardin snickering about her, and this messes with her head as she tries to push herself beyond her limits. Of course she breaks, and when Cardin laughs, she calls him out and challenges him to a fight. Normally Yang would wreck Cardin, but in her current state, along with her flashbacks in the heat of battle, Cardin wins. Right as Cardin is about to really hurt Yang, Glinda steps in and puts Cardin in his goddamn place. She asks Yang if she's alright, but Yang simply storms off and decides to head home and sleep. Yatsuhashi, however, convinces Yang to go to a memorial in Vale for those who died during the fall of Beacon. There's a ceremony where the people light lanterns in memory of those who died, and during this the acoustic version of Gold plays. General Ironwood, who's visiting to speak with the Vale Council, encounters Yang and asks about her recovery, and he tries to give her advice on how to come back strong after such a traumatic event. He also says that Weiss says hi. After about a week, Yang goes in for another therapy session with Peach, only to break down about her father, her mother, Blake, and Ruby, sobbing. Peach congratulates Yang on opening up, saying that now her recovery can truly begin. After a couple weeks, Yang battles Coco, Fox, and Yatsuhashi and has made a radical improvement, with the professors congratulating her. That night, they head to the Three Bears nightclub to celebrate, with the Magical Girl remix of This Will Be the Day playing in the background. Junior apologizes to Yang on what happened, though Yang shows just how much she's improved with an actual dance with him. The next day, Yang prepares to sneak out to go after Ruby, only for Tai to stop her and say she's not ready. They make a deal. If Yang can beat Tai in a fight without her semblance, he'll let her go. Of course she does, and she prepares to head off. Coco, Fox, and Yatsuhashi, however, want to make sure that she stays on course and remembers her friends have her back, and so they go with her. Coco also supplies Yang with a new outfit she designed, a sort of glad you're feeling better gift. They arrive in the port town of Suiden a couple weeks later, which is currently under attack by the Grimm. They battle the Grimm, with Yang facing off against Bearing Gull to I Burn. Not a remix, just straight I Burn. They save the town, and as a thank you, the people give Yang and Co another bike for free, with Fox and Yatsuhashi on one bike and Yang and Coco on Bumblebee. As they head off, we see Raven watching from afar, giving a faint but strange smile. And here we are at the last episode of Volume 4. Our cold open here is Team Ranger carrying Crow in a makeshift stretcher. Crow mumbles about the death of Summer, with Ruby getting super duper extra anxious and feeling kinda guilty for how she acted to her uncle. They reach a crossroads. One path leading to Kuroyuri, and the other heading to Kuchinashi. Kuchinashi is through the Golden Mountains, which will be impossible with them carrying Crow. Ruby asks if they can head to Kuroyuri, but Ren simply says it was destroyed years ago and they shouldn't even bother. Ruby and Jean pick up on Ren's stress, but Nora comes up with a compromise. She and Ren will head to Kuchinashi to get help, and afterwards they'll head to Kuroyuri to meet up with Ruby and Jean. Ruby and Jean don't want to split up, but they give in when Nora affirms it's their only option. With hugs and promises to stay safe, Ren and Nora rush to begin their hike as Ruby and Jean continue with Crow to Kuroyuri, with without even noticing the Nuclevi hoof print. The intro. RWBY and Jean arrive in Kodoyori. They situate themselves in the square beneath the dead tree, and RWBY breaks down blaming herself for all of this. Jean tells RWBY that not once did he ever blame her for any of this, and how he admires her strength to try and keep fighting despite all that's happened to her. Still, RWBY's dread takes hold, and that's not the best thing, considering what's around the corner. Cue our transition to the flashback of baby Ren in Kodoyori before it went to shit. He comes across baby Nora being harassed by other bratty kids. She and the bullies run away when Ren's father Lee shows up. Lee tells Ren that sometimes taking no action is the worst action of all. He then says he needs to find that girl and calm her so that she won't attract any Grimm, ominously telling Ren that it'd be best if he stayed at home with his mother. That night, screams wake Ren up. His mother An tries to leave with him, only for Lee to barge in saying that their village is doomed. The house collapses and kills An, and Ren wakes up in his father's arms as he and the other villagers run. Lee is exhausted and tells Ren to keep going on his own, giving him his knife and telling him to take action. Ren flees as Lee fires his arrows at the Nuclevi, though we only see the creature's shadow. Ren hides beneath the bridge, sobbing as his home is destroyed and his family is lost. He then notices Nora hiding beneath the house. Ren's semblance takes hold as he ceases crying and composes himself. He rushes to Nora's side, telling her that they have to be brave, and uses his semblance to mask her emotions, causing the Grimm to ignore them. Ren and Nora tell each other their names once Ren gives Nora a toy hammer, and we cut to the present where everyone's favorite lovebirds have reached a peak along the Golden Mountain Trail. That's when they come across a cave with a torn flag of Shion, along with tons of weapons of those who tried to kill the Nuclevi. They see the trees being parted as the Nuclevi head straight for Kodoyori, and Ren and Nora hold hands as the Nuclevi screams in the distance. They arrive at the village and reunite with RWBY and Jean, only for the Nuclevi to arrive on the scene at the same time. The fight ensues, with Jean carrying Crow off to the side. Ren's anger gets the better of him once Nora's aura breaks, and after Ren's aura breaks, Nora grabs Ren and pushes him safely beneath the house as RWBY and Jean continue their fight with the Nuclevi. Nora, crying, slaps Ren to bring him to his senses, refusing to let him kill himself. Nora reveals she's always blamed herself for Kodoyori's destruction, and this shocks Ren because he believed Nora was the one saving grace that kept him going after his home's demise. Holding the knife of Ren's father, Ren and Nora resolve to take this thing down once and for all together. Jean implements an actual strategy for Team Ranger to take the Nuclevi on, but it's simply too intelligent and powerful for them to take it down. That's when Raven, wearing her mask, along with Vernal, step in, and together they all manage to kill the Nuclevi, with Ren using his father's knife for the killing blow. RWBY asks this woman who she is, and when Raven takes off her mask and reveals her likeness to Yang, RWBY is left speechless. Raven simply says that this is RWBY's one save, and that she'd be better off not listening to her uncle. RWBY runs off to check on Crow, and Raven and Vernal vanish in a portal before Team Ranger can stop them. Noticing the tower of smoke from the Nuclevi's corpse, some airships from Mistral arrive and take Team Ranger and Crow to Mistral, with Crow having his venom treated on the flight. They reach Mistral and chill in their new house provided by Lionheart, whom they've yet to meet. Lionheart simply expected them to arrive and arranged a residence for them. RWBY writes her letter to Yang, but I'm hoping that my additions to her story this time around, along with showing how the others have been inspired by her words, makes this resonate more. Though again, we don't see Oscar in the train because we have not met him yet. We end with RWBY mentioning that they're going to meet with Lionheart once Crow is feeling better, only to have it revealed that Watts is currently meeting with him at Haven. And that's it. That is the first half of my Rewrite's second season, aka Volume 4. I hope you enjoyed. Next time we're going to be covering the second half of Season 2, aka Volume 5. If you did enjoy this, feel free to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications because YouTube hates creators. Likewise, if you'd like to further support the channel, you can pledge on Patreon, pick up some Teespring merch, or check out the first chapter and Goodreads page for my upcoming novel in the description below. I'm the Unicorn of War, and this has been a shit show.